fact that even before God came to him and told him to build the ark, he was the only man that found grace in the eyes of the Lord when everybody else's thoughts were on evil continuously. So that shows that, it didn't matter what other people did around him. He was going to stay to the Word.
And that's why God chose him, right? Yeah. But when I think about taking 100 years, and I've never went to see the ark that's built in Tennessee or wherever, Kentucky, where that's at, but 100 years now. Here's another fact about the ark. It was the biggest ship that ever been built at that time. In fact, I did some research on it, and according to some people, it was the 1880s before anything was even built close to that size. This man did this thousands of years ago. But just think about, when you talk about patience, and I think I got, I don't have it on here, I got it on my notes, perseverance, but what else was happening to Noah when he was building this ark for all those years? What do you think? Everything's not said in the Bible. We have to kind of figure this out. But what do you think might be happening? One at a time. Hold on. What was it?
People were cheering at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you walk by, and he's building this thing. What are you building? I'm building a boat. How big? Oh, it's going to be 450 feet long. So, people, and then think about it. He's building it this year, and if you go back next year, he's still building it. If you go back after you have your 45th high school reunion, he's still building it. And you got to believe, hey, Noah, when's this thing going to be done? And then he's also saying there, people's got to ask why, right? They're asking why? God's going to flood the earth. Really? You said that 83 years ago. He's still not flooded the earth. So this had to be, he was just ridiculed for years and years and years. The Bible don't tell us how he made a living or ate or whatever, but you're assuming he's doing other things too, right? He wasn't just building the ark or overseeing building the ark or for other people involved, but this...
The engineering of the ark, the ratio of the length to the
Yes,
width
I know what you're going to say.
Is the same as a modern ship, large ship. Of course, long before there ever was such a thing as a ship. So, just interesting.
It can only come from God, right? It didn't come from Noah. Yeah. So what he's referring to is, ship's got to be a certain ratio of width to depth to go so far down in the water, and how much water, they figure how much water it actually displaces when it's in there. And according to most calculations, this boat, the way it was built, couldn't even be, it would be hard to flip it over. It was made to go through a flood. So incredible engineering went into this, that we don't even see the beauty of this when you just read the Bible without thinking about it. So Noah had lots of strengths. And how else do we know that Noah was a man of faith? How else? What else? Where else is he mentioned as a man of faith? Hebrews. Yeah, he's one of those mentioned, right? We'd all love to be one of those people mentioned in Hebrews 11, right? So he's one of those that's mentioned and gets a couple sentences there. What about Abraham now? What was his strength? Sorry? Yes. What else?
His faith in God.
Faith. Definitely a hero of faith, right? Some things we can surmise. Was he generous? Was Abraham generous? At least in his dealings with Lot, right? Look, both of them go out here and he says, you go to the right, I'll go to the left, you go to the left, I'll go to the right. That's Abraham talking to Lot. And, he's saying, you take first choice and I'll take whatever's left over. So he's generous. Was he successful? Yeah. There was so much livestock and people that they owned that between them they couldn't survive on a piece of land. They were getting into arguments over the grazing land. So they had to, go to separate places. What else? How else do we know that he was also a loving, caring person? In the story we just studied, at length of that little matrix, what did he do for Sodom? He prayed, but what else did he do? Sorry?
He tried to intervene.
Yeah. Well, he did to a certain degree.
With God.
Right, yeah, and the other night we were talking in the elders thing about persistence and that kind of stuff, and I was thinking of him really, because to bargain with God or to try to bargain with God, that takes a lot of guts. So because of these people and the people there, including Lot, you know, he bargained with God, or tried to do something. He put himself out there on a limb for other people. So,
And it dawned on me, I always kind of thought that, you know, as Abraham bargained for Sodom and Gomorrah, it was almost on behalf of Lot.
Yeah.
Just kind of, you almost kind of get that sense that, well, don't destroy those cities because my nephew's there.
right.
But the indication is the angels go there, they go directly to Lot anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very possible, and maybe even likely, that Abraham's not bargaining for Lot, but he literally is bargaining for cities that he knows no one, and they're extremely sinful cities.
Right. And it could be both, too. It
That's
could be
right.
both. He's doing both. But either way, he's caring. He's caring. He's just not a man with, 40,000 head of cattle. He's caring about people, too. So a lot of strength. And, of course, when you read, again, Hebrews, he's mentioned more than anybody. There's more text in Hebrews 11 about him than any other person. A lot of people are mentioned, but his is pretty lengthy. What about Lot, though? What about Lot? What was his strengths? Did he have strengths? What was his? Whoa, getting crickets.
It says that he was righteous.
2 Peter, right? I'm going to flip back to that. We just read that last week. What else might be something you see as, he had, outside of that verse, we're going to talk about this in length in a minute too, but outside of that verse, how else would you know he has some good qualities? Hospitable, right? He put his house and his home and his family in harm's way for the two men that he didn't know was angels at the time. He just thought they were visitors, to protect them. He also, if you go back to those verses where the angels come down, when they told him what was going to happen, he did go directly to his son-in-laws and say, hey, God's going to destroy this place. And you can tell by the way it's written that, he believed that. Now, he still had some hesitation with some other stuff after that. And we're going to talk about the weaknesses in a minute. But let's go back to Noah one time. So he got a lot of strengths. What's a weakness Noah had? Maybe that you can think of. He's not Jesus. He's not perfect. So what's one thing we know happened to him? Yes.
His alternate for his daughters was, I don't know, in my mind, very questionable.
Now you're talking about Lot. Now you hold that thought. We're going to come back to that. That's a good point. But I'm asking about Noah. What's something that he had a weakness of? He got drunk, right? And then his son saw him, and that caused his son to be accursed. So I don't know of other things maybe mentioned. Anybody else know of something maybe I missed? But, he did get drunk because he was a farmer. Not that all farmers get drunk, but I mean, we were farmers, and there was no alcohol at all in our house, but yeah, so I guess he's raising the grapes. It's hard to get drunk off chickens. Anyway, although my wife's fried chicken is so good, sometimes I get high when I eat it. I'm telling you, it's just that good. Okay, what about Abraham? What are some weaknesses Abraham had? Yeah, he would lie under pressure, right? Yes, that's right. And tell why.
He was a little impatient.
Yeah.
God had promised that all the earth would be blessed through him, and so instead of waiting on Sarah, because God had promised a child through Sarah, he took Hagar.
Took a maidservant and had a baby by her. He also laughed when God told him that at 100 and Sarah at 90, they were going to have a child. Of course, Sarah laughed too. So he wasn't perfect, right? None of these people are perfect in the Bible except for Jesus. So we're gonna hold Lot just a minute. We're going to talk about Lot just a minute. Now, going back to 2 Peter, and we'll go back to 2 Peter real quick, and we will see that, when I get back to it there, see there in verse 7, and if he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was witnessed by the, let me read this in here, I can read it better than here, the filthy lives of the lawless men, for that righteous man, second time he said it, living among them day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw in her. So Peter calls him righteous 3 times in 2 verses. Now, because we're supposed to examine the scriptures like the Bereans, right? So when I think of Lot, is Lot the first man you think of when you think of righteousness? No, he's not me either. I mean, you know, I read the Bible, and when I was studying this, I thought, I've read this verse many times, but I never noticed him being called righteous 3 times. Because when I think of Lot, I think of a somewhat compromised person, to be honest. But Peter says this. So tell me some reasons why you might think of Lot as not being, you know, and he's not mentioned in Hebrews. Let's make sure we understand that. He's not one of the top tier, I guess. He's never mentioned there. What's some things he did that make you think that, hey, he's not really, you know, he's got some serious flaws? What are some things he did based off what we know about him in Genesis?
He chose the more lush green land that happened to be toward Sodom.
Yeah, he didn't reciprocate, did he? He could have said, hey, no, Abraham, you're my uncle, you take it, and I'll take the lesser. He looked at it, he said, this is definitely better, I'm taking it. He's somewhat a little bit selfish, self-centered, right? He chose what's best for Lot. What else did he do? He procrastinated, right. When, you know, even though he went and told his son-in-laws about that, when it came time, they had to kind of rush him along.
Don't linger and get out.
Right.
It says he lingered, and then that took him out.
What else did he do, though? Where did they tell him to go? To the mountains. And he said, you know, I can't do that. So, I mean, even though the fire and brimstone is getting ready to come down on Sodom and Gomorrah imminently, and he's getting rushed, he's still kind of trying to bargain. No, I want to go to Zoar. If I go to the mountains, I'm going to die. Yeah, Rocky.
A lot of people don't dig into it and take the time and think about that. You'll find out that a lot of the things that on the surface that looks bad about him is really not that bad. Like, for instance, the procrastination that people want to attribute that to. If you look at the timeline there, I mean, you're looking at a 24-hour period there where Lot is awake. He's doing this all through the night. He's taking the time to prepare a meal for these 2 men that are angels. These people are bombarding his door. To his credit, he protects them. He drags them into the house, trying to protect them. It's then that he finds out from the angels, God's going to destroy this city. You got to go out. You got to go leave. It takes some time for him to go out and go find those future son-in-laws and talk to them and try to persuade them. All this is happening at night. And then he comes back, so he's tired. You read later on where the Bible refers to him as being an old man, because that's why his daughters do the things that they do to try to bring about sons for him. So he's an old man. So the fact that he's been awake a long time, he's been under a lot of stress, he's old. God allowed him to go to a different city instead of going up into the mountains. God didn't tell him, you know, stop making excuses. You know, why don't you go there? I think that whole thing was providential there to show, you know, God is going to spare. He's going to spare one city of the plain that Lot is in, but it's not going to be Sodom and it's not going to be Gomorrah because their wickedness is so great they got to be punished. So I think when you read it and think about the timeline and look at the details and look at other verses, you can see why the Bible refers to him as righteous. He wasn't sinless. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is but Jesus. But I mean, even here in Peter, 2 Peter, in chapter 2, it talks about how he was vexed. His righteous soul was vexed day to day from their unlawful deeds. And if you look at Genesis chapter 19, I believe it's the New King James Version, where the people, the men, when they're attacking his house, you know, it says, you're going to be a judge of us. Well, I think the New King James says, you keep on being a judge of us. So he had a reputation for standing against the evil that they were doing. So there's a lot of little subtle details there that you really have to spend the time to dig into and think about to illustrate why Peter says what he says. Mm-hmm. To his credit, his daughters were still virgins.
Yeah.
They were there in a very wicked town. His daughters were still virgins. I mean, think about what an accomplishment that is, even in the 21st century in America, how much of an accomplishment that is. So clearly, he had a good influence on his family. So I think people rush and they read one thing and they draw a conclusion, and you got to look at the totality of the information that the Bible gives us. Admittedly, doesn't give us a lot of information, but it gives us enough to substantiate what Peter says, that he was a righteous man.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that. But it does indeed say in the Bible, but he hesitated because of the Lord's compassion for him, which you alluded to. The men grabbed his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters and let them out. So he did hesitate. Now, is he righteous? Yeah. Simply, Peter tells us that, and we get that. But he did hesitate, and he did make some decisions that were selfish. And let's go back to your point. You want to make that point?
That his alternative that he gave to the mob was his daughters instead of the angels, who he didn't know they were angels, but the people who were with him.
Right. Now, was there a cultural difference back then, as part of this? Women not going to like this, but I mean, women were not held in high esteem. And to me, as a father of 2 daughters, that's horrific. I mean, I just can't even fathom what he would offer to do, but it was a different time, obviously. So there's no doubt he's righteous, Rocky, but there's no doubt also he has some flaws, and we can see that in these scriptures here, and some of the things he did. What else did he choose to do, though, when he had, let's go back to what you said about, I chose this land. Where did he choose to live near? Where did he pitch his tent near? Sodom. It didn't get to be a terrible place right after he moved there. He chose to move into a place where, there was a lot of stuff going on. And so to me, that's kind of a, kind of a negative connotation right there. But
they were still to stay there and make an influence. So, I'm just saying we have to be careful about the judgments that we make. I mean, compared to where I came from, Charlotte is a very wicked town. But yet I still had to come here because of my job. Now, did I let the wickedness of Charlotte get into me? No, I didn't. So I think we have to look at, no, seriously, we came from a very small town. Okay? We just don't have the crime that you have in a small town that you have in Charlotte. But I think you have to look at that and draw a comparison, that it didn't, we don't need to impugn his motives because he necessarily went there.
no, but we need to look at the facts. And the facts say he did have some faults. And I came from the sticks, so I know what you're saying. I mean, I came from a place that wasn't no town, so, it was just out in the middle of nowhere. So I get the comparison there. So, he had some things that at least, and when I asked everybody what y'all thought, did y'all think of him as a righteous man? Overwhelmingly, nobody really raised their hand and thought he was a righteous man. But to Rocky's point, there are some things he did, the random act of kindness to the people. And then, but it really goes back to, like everything else, this. Because Peter says, if we rescue Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the filthy lives of the lawless men, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in a righteous soul by the lawless deeds. Peter is speaking from an inspired word, not from my speculation or my reading something into something. So that was my whole point here. We're going back to this. I perceive him, he's not a hero of faith to me. But when I read this, I just have to believe it because Peter said it, and Peter's inspired by God. And he not only says it one time, but 3 times. So, but I think it's good to discuss this because you see, the different points. You've got a different viewpoint a little bit than I do, Rocky, and how you look at it. But I think it's good to discuss this because in the end, he was righteous. And Peter tells us that he did not participate in those things. We can see that right in those verses. And he was actually tormented in his soul by it, even though he lived near Sodom. And that's the reason I was kind of bringing all that up because it really comes to what he's saying here and how and how really Peter goes out of his way to say that he is a righteous man. And that's part of the Bible, right, in that not everything's recorded. We see that too. The Bible couldn't record everything that was said either by God or by Jesus or did by the apostles or anybody else. So, we have to be able sometimes to kind of look through this and look at all the information. Any comments on that? We got 2 minutes. Any comments before I start another section? None? I hate to start reading this. Well, we'll read it. So, but we'll probably have to read it again next week. This is the next section. 2 Peter 2, 10 through 14. So if you think about what we studied so far, I've only got through 9 verses in 3 weeks. But the first 3 verses really were about false teachers among us. And then verses 4 through 9 we just finished up is really Peter giving assurances. If God did this, then he's going to, and this, and if he did this, and if he did this, then he can surely take care of righteous people. That's what he says. He's giving us the reassurances. Now, when you start back in 10 through 14, Peter's going right back to talking about false teachers again. So I'm going to read this real quick, and we'll probably have to finish there. This is especially true of those who follow the corrupt desire of the sinful nature and despise authority. Bold and arrogant, these men are not afraid to slander celestial beings. Yet even angels, although they are stronger and more powerful, do not bring slanderous accusations against such beings in the presence of the Lord. But these men blaspheme in matters they do not understand, born only to be caught and destroyed, and like beasts they too will perish. They will be paid back with harm for the harm they have done. Their idea of pleasure is to carouse in broad daylight. They are blots and blemishes, reveling in their pleasures while they feast with you. With eyes full of adultery, they never stop sinning. They seduce the unstable. They are experts in greed and a cursed brood. So in the 1 minute we got left, let's just talk about, again, this celestial being is brought up here, referring to angels, which we've seen now a couple times, right? In 4 through 9, Peter uses as an example of these people, were saying things to the angels. And he's using that same kind of example here, that these false teachers would slander an angel. And we're going to look, we don't have time today, but next week we're going to look at why that's a big deal. Because, right, we're going to see an example with Michael the Archangel, how he really dealt with Satan and some stuff. And the fact that he wouldn't even say something slanderous to Satan himself. And probably was justified to do so, but did not do that. And do we have 10 o'clock? We have 10 o'clock. So we will stop there and start back here, and we're going to talk about these false teachers and their a lot of descriptors that Peter's using to describe them. Thank you.